So this evening, we are fortunate to have Dr. Stein join us to discuss her campaign successes. Dr. Stein ran for President of the United States in the 2012 election, in addition to the current 2016 election. She ran for Governor of Massachusetts in the 2002 and 2010 elections, and Dr. Stein currently holds the record for the most number of votes ever received by a woman candidate for the presidential nomination. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Jill Stein.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for putting together this incredible program tonight. Can we please give Emily a round of applause? And I want to thank all the panelists here for sharing their amazing inspirations. Baird for founding a new chapter, a local chapter of the Green Party, and to all the candidates. I'm really so humbled to be on your team, and you just do us all so proud. So can we give them another round of applause? Thank you so much. And I will say, Connecticut, you do totally rock, I have to say. Being here today, Connecticut is amazing. So, and I have to say, all of you here tonight are really amazing. Let me just ask, how many come here tonight through the Sanders movement? Just raise your hand. Woo! Let's give you a round of applause for getting this good thing going. And how many are here as longtime Greens who've been a part of building the party for so long? Well, thank you for laying the foundation. And who's here as a new Green, can I ask? Are there some who've recently seen the light? Okay, that's really awesome. And how many are here just to sort of check it out, not being a part of one affiliation or another? Well, that's really awesome, and thank you for doing that. That really, I think, represents the incredible excitement of this moment right now, because we are in really a transformative moment, really a historic moment, partly because we've never seen crises like what we are seeing now, in terms of the climate melting down before our very eyes, where the science is now telling us. Jim Hansen, people recognize that name, the foremost climate scientist out there. He's never been wrong. He was the guy who really first called it like it is back in the 1970s, testifying before Congress about this thing called global warming. I think they called it the greenhouse effect at that time. But he hasn't been wrong since then, and now he's saying, if we don't have a dramatic change of course, we are looking at the possibility of a sea level rise as high as 9 feet or even double digits as soon as 2060 is what he's saying. And there's a new study described as an oh my God study, described by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It hasn't gotten much publicity yet because it's just been verbally described, actually at a conference of insurance corporations, where this senior scientist from NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, showed up saying that, that it's really serious business. They had just gotten this oh my God study from the Antarctic, which basically said we could see this 9 feet of sea level rise as soon as 2050. And there's a pattern here. The dates keep getting closer and closer as the studies get better and better, and also as climate change intensifies and accelerates. So, we're seeing a crisis like we've never seen before in terms of where the climate is going. This is serious business, obviously. You don't want to wait for a 9-foot sea level rise, because that means goodbye to the Pacific Islands. It's also goodbye to the island of Manhattan, and it's goodbye to the state of Florida. It is goodbye to many other coastal cities, the country of Bangladesh. It's 600 million climate refugees for a 9-foot sea level rise. That's 10 times as many refugees as the world is seeing right now, which are tearing apart the Middle East, Europe, and so on. There's no way we're going to survive a crisis with 600 million refugees, which, by the way, there are about 16 nuclear power plants at sea level here in the US alone, which will go Fukushima if we allow this 9-foot sea level rise. Which is to say, this is an election like none other. We're not only looking at what kind of a world we will be, but we are deciding whether we will be a world at all or not going forward. So it really is time to stand up. You know, people say, are you scared of Donald Trump? Well, actually, I'm really scared of climate change. I'm also really scared of expanding war. I'm afraid of expanding nuclear arms race with 2,000 missiles on hair trigger alert right now. And Hillary Clinton, who I'm also scared of, wants to start an air war over Syria with a nuclear armed power. This is the slippery slope. So we say no thank you to both of those lethal choices. We live in a democracy. We have other choices. I so appreciate people because I hear so much of the propaganda. You know, this is the question that we always get from the corporate press, you know, where they say, you know it's hopeless, don't you? That there's no way. To which I say, well, actually, don't you know we are in a voter revolt that's happening right now, and your job as the media is actually to inform and empower voters to make the choices that we must make to save our future. That's on you, corporate media. So it's not only the climate crisis, we also have an economic crisis right now. As you may know, this so-called recovery was a recovery really at the top. The Congressional Budget Office just put out a study last week showing that the top 10%, the richest 10%, has 75% of the country's wealth. 75%, that doesn't leave very much to go around. And if you look at the other end, the lower 50%, that's like half of our population, has 1% of the wealth. Think of that, 50% has 1% of the wealth. You know, this is an absolutely unsustainable and unconscionable vicious economic disparity that has all kinds of consequences. So among them, everyday working people are really struggling to survive. Average workers' wages now are just barely above the poverty level. The jobs that have come back after the Wall Street crash have been low-wage, part-time, temporary jobs. Anybody seeing those jobs out there? When you go out and you try to get a job, especially as the younger generation first coming into the workforce, these are the kinds of jobs that are available to you. And, by the way, there is an entire generation right now, and I know this is not news to you, whether you're looking at millennials or Gen Xers, it's basically a generation that is locked in predatory student loan debt. We say, if we found a way to bail out the crooks on Wall Street, it's time to bail out the younger generation that's the victim of that waste, fraud, and abuse on Wall Street. If we could come up with $16 trillion is what we forked over to get Wall Street out of the fix that they were in, 16 trillion, then we can come up with the 1.3 trillion that we need in order to bail out the students. It's time to do that. Bailing out a generation of young people, in fact, who already have the skills, they got their degree, right? So they're trained up, they're ready to go, they have the passion. They need to be unleashed, they need to be unchained and then they need to be turned loose so that they can actually do the work to revive our economy and create the economy for the 20th century, the 21st century. It has always taken the younger generation to re-envision the economy. And that's what we need young people to do right now. It's always taken the younger generation to create transformational change. And we need a boatload of that right now. But whether it was the civil rights movement, or the women's movement, or the peace movement, or more recently, the Black Lives Matter movement, or the immigrant rights movement and the Dreamers, it's always been the younger generation that has led the way forward. So it's really important for all of us, not just for the younger generation, but for all of society, for us to liberate that generation that has always led the way forward. And we will do that. And let me say, one way that we will do that is because we not only have the solutions at hand, we actually have the numbers that it takes to win the day. The well-kept secret is that there's actually 43 million young people who are held hostage by predatory student loan debt. And that number gets bigger every day. Student debt is something you can go into, but you very rarely get out of, because the jobs are not there that enable you to pay it down. So by the way, forget the guilt trip. You know, anybody familiar with the guilt trip that says you took out those loans, you got to pay them back, that's on your head? Well, actually, Wall Street tore up the contract when they crashed the economy. Those jobs aren't there. Those jobs were part of this implicit contract. So they tore up the contract. Young people should not be carrying around that burden for the rest of your lives. So that 43 million, and here's the secret, 43 million is a winning plurality of the presidential vote. That means by getting the word out just to people who are in debt, that they can come out and vote green to basically cancel their debt, and there's only one place that they can put their votes. There's only one campaign that will bail out the students, and you're looking at it right now. By coming out and voting green, we actually mobilize the power that it takes to make that a reality, to actually win the election. 43 million people can do that. So the bottom line is, friends don't let friends stay home. In the election in 2016, come out and vote green, because if we do that, we have all the numbers in the world that it takes. So when they tell us, you know, don't you know that you're powerless? We say, you know, that is a propaganda campaign. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it, we're going to use it. Student debt is the way to lead the charge forward. So, you know, again on this question of why this is such a unique and historic election. The environmental emergency, which we just spoke about, and then the economic emergency. There's another emergency, a real emergency of human rights that we see in so many ways. So, for example, the crisis of Black lives who are on the firing line, we have seen once again played out in the last couple of days with these unbelievably heart-wrenching stories where a man had his hands up, complying with police orders. This was in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Friday, doing exactly what he was told, moving at a very calm and measured speed. And, you know, out of nowhere, he's just murdered in the light of day. For what crime? Because his car broke down on a highway. He came to police attention and was essentially murdered for driving while black. And then this other case in North Carolina, in Charlotte, another absolutely tragic case of a father waiting for his kid to come home on a school bus reading a book, as he was said to have done every day for the last several years. This is what he did. But he happened to be in the line of sight of some police officers who basically saw him. It's not clear exactly what happened. They say he has a gun, but everybody else, including eyewitnesses reported by Democracy Now!, say that he was basically there reading a book, like he does every day, waiting for his kid. And by the way, it's legal to own a gun and to have a gun in your car, for that matter. So, you know, what exactly brought him to police attention? It's not clear that anything brought him to police attention, except for sitting in his car and reading a book while black. So we need to fix this. We need to put an end to this police violence that has gone on now for a couple of years without a solution in sight. So we're saying not one more police killing. It's time to bring it to an end. That means instead of confrontation, instead of this broken windows policing, which is basically looking for confrontation, we teach peace. We change the culture of policing so that police learn how to de-escalate, not to escalate. We demilitarize our police. We ensure that every community has a police review board, a citizen review board that has the power of subpoena, that has the power to hire and fire. And we ensure that every community has an independent investigator who's independent of the police and the DA's office, so that every death at the hands of police is investigated as a matter of routine. The victims and their families are owed justice. They are owed an explanation. That's how we stop this crisis of police violence. Let me mention just a couple other things, because we're led to believe that these problems are absolutely unsolvable. Like this problem of the climate and the economy. Let me just summarize briefly. We can solve both of these crises at once with an emergency jobs program that also solves the emergency of the climate crisis. We're calling for an emergency Green New Deal, creating 20 million jobs to green our energy, our food system, public transportation, and to restore critical infrastructure, including ecosystems, like our water systems, like our pipes, so that they're not polluted with lead, like our forests, and like our fisheries. We need to be reviving those systems because our lives literally depend on them, as does our economy. So if we're creating 20 million jobs, good wage jobs, we not only revive the economy, we turn the tide on climate change, and we make the friggin' wars for oil obsolete. We don't need them anymore when we have clean energy. And as an added bonus here, it turns out when we green our energy supply, we get so much healthier right away. It's like almost immediate. When we know this from Cuba, because when Cuba's oil pipeline went down in 1990, and suddenly they didn't have any more pollution, and suddenly they had to transform to a healthy organic food system and put a lot of people to work as farmers, because they couldn't drive the tractors anymore. They didn't have fuel, and they also didn't have pesticides, which are derived from fossil fuel. So suddenly we had an organic farm system, healthy food, and also you had a public transportation system. And in fact, 1 million bicycles were given away so that people would have a way to get where they wanted to go using muscle power. So our Green New Deal calls not only for public transportation, but for safe sidewalks and for safe bike paths, because we have a right to recreational transportation as well. And when you put that together, it turns out we get so much healthier, as we saw in Cuba, that the savings in our health expenditures are enough to actually pay the costs of the green energy transition. So this is a win-win-win. Revive the economy, stop climate change, make wars for oil obsolete, and get healthy enough that it actually pays for itself from the savings in our health. So this is another stimulus package of our dreams, something that we cannot say no to because we have a climate emergency, and the Green New Deal, the whole objective here is to reach 100% clean renewable energy by 2030. Not in the next century, but now, in the near future, to get to fully 100% wind, water, and sun. That means no more pipelines, no more fossil fuels. We actually decommission the fossil fuel plants as we are bringing green energy online. And we do it as a national emergency because that, in fact, is what we are facing. Just one last quick mention, actually two quick mentions. One is that when we cancel student debt, the other thing that we must do is make public higher education free as a human right. It's time for everyone to have it. It is something that pays for itself. We know that from the GI Bill. For every dollar we put in, we get back $7 in return from that educated young person who has a college degree. And this is what was proven in the GI Bill. That improved revenue is from better return on the tax base and also other public benefits. So it more than pays for itself. There is no excuse not to move to free public higher education starting now. And very quickly, I'll just say on the immigration crisis, it's time to provide a welcoming path to citizenship for the immigrants who have always been at the core of our economies, our communities, and our culture. It's time for a welcoming path to citizenship. And to Donald Trump, we say, we don't need your friggin' wall. We just have to stop invading other countries and turning people into refugees and coming here to try to save their lives. So the bottom line is we can have an America and a world that works for all of us. A world that puts people, planet, and peace over profit. These problems really can be solved. And you know what? You don't have to be an incumbent who's been a part of this corrupt political system to solve these problems. In fact, the opposite applies. If you are an incumbent part of this corrupt political system, you are not capable of coming forward with a politics of integrity to ensure that we can solve these problems. This is a realignment election. The Democratic and Republican corporate parties are merging. Just today, I learned that George H.W. Bush is actually endorsing Hillary Clinton, like so many other neocons and leaderships of the Republican Party, from Christie Whitman to John Negroponte, that is from the moderates, to the total, lunatic fringe of the Republican Party. They are making one big happy corporate family with the Democratic Party under Hillary Clinton's leadership. So is this, the politics that's going to save us? No, it is most definitely not. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones that need to stand up. Don't for a minute drink the Kool-Aid that tells you that you are powerless, because we are only as powerless as we think we are. In the words of Alice Walker, again, the biggest way people give up power is not knowing that we have it to start with. We do have it. We have the numbers just on student debt alone. Are we going to get there? Are we going to go all the way in this election? Well, I'll tell you, I wouldn't rule it out. If we are able to get into the debates, this is a voter revolt in the making right now. The American public has rejected Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, who are considered the most disliked and untrusted candidates in our history. The American people are ready. Even Donald's supporters don't really support Donald. A recent poll, Quinnipiac, if you want to look it up, a week ago, showed that the vast majority, it's about 3/4 of Donald Trump's supporters, are voting for him, not because they like him, but because they can't stand Hillary. And 2/3 of Hillary's supporters don't really support her, they just don't like Donald Trump. So how about we give people another option that they could actually support? You may have noticed that there is one campaign that the corporate media does not like to talk about. They're okay talking about Gary Johnson because at the end of the day, Gary Johnson is also taking the corporate money and opposes campaign finance reform. He's perfectly happy with Citizens United. He is in the party that was founded by one of the Koch brothers. So does it really challenge politics as usual? I don't think so. It's kind of politics as usual on steroids in many ways. So there is one campaign the media does not like to talk about. And in fact, Donald Trump has had about 35,000 times as much airtime as we have. 35,000 times the amount of free media. This is the public airwaves, but it's being given away to Donald Trump because he's good for corporate media's bottom line. The president of CBS actually said that. Hillary Clinton has had about 20,000 times as much free primetime corporate media. We've had zero, basically, maybe 2 hours worth, not very much. And it's actually rather amazing that we're doing 4, 5, even up to 7% in the polls, despite the absolute media blackout. So when the press says to me, well, don't you know? Aren't you watching the poll numbers? Don't you see how terrible they are? To which I say, no, they actually show how powerful we are because you're not doing your job. You're not informing the public. They're having to spread the word through the grapevine. So without that coverage, we are still breaking through and doing better than any non-corporate campaign ever has at this point in the election cycle. So people are ready. 75% of voters, actually it's 76% of voters, are clamoring for open debates that include all 4 choices. When we say open debates, it's not 20 choices. There are actually 4 candidates who are on the ballot in enough states that we could actually numerically win the election. It is a concrete reality possibility, realistic possibility. And so this is not a crazy thing to ask. What is crazy is to have a fake commission that is a private corporation run by the Democratic and Republican parties in control of our debates. That's what the Commission on Presidential Debates is. It is the operatives of the Democratic and Republican parties who set criteria in order to silence political opposition to their candidates. We reject the 15% criteria, which is not arbitrary, it's intentional in order to silence opposition. So we say Americans not only have a right to vote, we have a right to know who we can vote for. So please consider joining me at the steps of the debate at Hofstra University on Monday, this Monday, the 26th. We are going to show up, invited or not. We are going to be there to stand up for our right to an open debate. Come early, because things are going to start early, around 4 o'clock. If you go to jill2016.com and join the campaign for open debates, you'll get all the info about it, or through the Connecticut Greens, you can also find out about it. Consider, carpooling, bus, whatever, but come out and let's just give them a run for their money. If we're gonna get through the next decade here alive, let alone the next century, we need a democracy. If we're going to solve the crisis of the climate, we need a democracy. The solutions will not come from the fossil fuel companies and their puppets running for office. If we're going to solve the problem of the war, this crisis of endless war, of catastrophic regime change, which has done what? Only produced mass refugee migrations, failed states, worse terrorist threats. We need to have a democracy to stand up and guide our way forward. That machine, by the way, the military machine, is gobbling up over half of our discretionary budget. Almost half of your income taxes is going to provide for this bloated and dangerous military budget. We're calling for a new kind of offensive in the Middle East, a peace offensive in the Middle East that starts with a weapons embargo and a freeze on the bank accounts of the countries like Saudi Arabia that continue to fund terrorist enterprises. It's not rocket science how to get out of this mess. It's just political integrity to get out of this mess. It is real democracy to get out of this mess. And to do that, we need to start with democracy, beginning with an open and inclusive debate. So join us at Hofstra, and together we can say no to the lesser evil and yes to the greater good, and stand up for the America and a world that works for all of us, that puts people, planet, and peace over profit. The power to create that world is not just in our hopes, it's not just in our dreams. Right here in Windham, Connecticut, that power is in our hands. Thank you for making it so.